OpenAI just blew everyone's mind this week with all their crazy new updates. And in this video, I'll show you exactly how to use their new Assistants API feature, which allows you to build powerful AI assistants completely trained on your own custom knowledge without writing a single line of code. Let's do it. Now, this also does not require any third-party vector databases or anything like that either. You can now upload PDFs and text files or CSVs or whatever kind of training you want straight into your dashboard, and bam, your AI assistant is now trained. Then all you have to do is hook up your app to the API and you're ready to roll. So click the links below to sign up for a free Bubble.io account and a now 3 times cheaper OpenAI account. They just reduced their prices. And be sure to build along with me because you're about to have your own custom trained AI on your very own website. Let's do it. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is head over to Bubble.io. If you don't already have an account, click the link below and you can sign up for Bubble. Once you're signed up and ready to go, you'll see something like this. I mean, I already have a bunch of apps in my dashboard, but you will see this Create an App button. Go ahead and click that, and you can give your app a name, whatever name you want. I'll just put something like Assistant AI Test or something like that. And you can start with the basic features for now, and you can go ahead and skip the application assistant, and we are ready to roll. Now, this tutorial isn't necessarily meant for design. This is probably going to be frankly ugly, but at least you'll get the functionality done and you can put lipstick on it later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this real quick to a column container, and I'm going to grab a repeating group. Why? Well, because this group will be repeating all of the chats, right? All of the messages to and from the AI. I'm going to go ahead and just uncheck fixed width, and I'll bring the minimum height to like 600 or so. I'm going to go to the Appearance tab, and I'm going to uncheck a fixed number of rows. We don't know how many chats there will be necessarily. And now as for type of content, we haven't defined that yet. Let's go to the Data tab, and let's make a new type called Message. And obviously, messages are text content we send to and from ChatGPT, right? And what attributes does a message have? Well, we have the text itself. That's just of type text. You can just choose type text there. And we have from who. And now this will either be the user or the AI assistant, right? Now this is 2 different options, user or AI assistant. And so for options, what I like to do is go to the option sets. I know it's just 2 options, but I still like to do it. So I'll say from who ? And just make that option set. And then I'll say literally user or assistant. And then I'll come back to my data tab and I'll make a new field and I'll call it from who. And the type, the field type will be that new option set we just created, from who, and click create. Now, if you wanted to like make your data private and constrain it down to only a specific user or organization, you would want to add more fields and do privacy rules and that stuff. But that's not what this tutorial is for. So I'll keep it simple for now. Let's go back to the design tab and now back to our repeating group. And I'm going to say the type of content is messages, right? And I'm going to do a search in the database for all messages. Now, again, in another tutorial, I would teach you how to constrain it down to only the messages between the current user and the AI, or the current user's organization and the AI. But in this case, I'll just keep it simple. So we'll just search for all messages. Now I'm going to go ahead and add an image. So I'll just say image, grab that, drop it into the repeating group. Now we don't want an image that big. Maybe we probably want it like what? Like 35 by 35, something like that. Now this maybe a little bit bigger, maybe like 40 by 40. Now let's go to the appearance, and I'm going to go ahead and upload an image of AI, right? Because the AI will be responding back and forth. Now, this repeating group, its layout is fixed, and I can drag this around and it'll be fixed wherever I put it, which is good. But I actually, for this particular use case, I'm going to change this layout to a row so that things will be all next to each other. I'm going to go ahead and center this thing vertically, and I'm going to give it maybe like top, bottom, left, and right margin of like 20 all around it so that it has some breathing room around it. Now I'm going to grab a text element, throw it on there. If I go to the layout tab, I'm going to uncheck fixed width, get rid of minimum width, fit the width to the content itself, get rid of minimum height, and center this thing vertically. Now, if I go back to the appearance and I say, hi, how are you? Question mark or something like that. Well, that's the chatbot saying something, right? But is it always going to say, hi, how are you? No. So we want this not to be static text. We want it to be dynamic. So let's put that and let's say whatever the current cell's message text itself is, that's what we want to put. Are the messages always going to be coming from the robot? No, not necessarily. So let's go and we'll say normally it's this robot image. However, on condition where, I'm going to define a new condition and say on condition where this message, the current cell's message, when it's from who is the user, well, we want a different image. So I'm going to say a different image source. And for this simple use case, I'm just going to simply upload an image of myself. There we go. Awesome. Now, if I hit the preview button here, you will notice that there's absolutely nothing on our page. Why? Well, because there are no messages in the database. Remember, where are we getting the messages from? We're searching in our database. If we go into the data tab, we go into the app data tab, there are no messages here. So let's make some. And the way we do that is we need something to type in. So we grab a multi-line input element, drop it onto the page. We also want a button of some sort, drop that onto the page. Now, remember, this layout of this page, if I click here, it's a column container. We don't want it to be a column container. Well, we do want the page to be a column container, but this input and this button need to be next to each other, which is a row container. So I'm going to click this button, hold the shift key, click this input, right click them both, and group them into a row container. Cool. Now let's change the button and we'll say send message, something like that. It looks like it needs to be slightly wider, so I'll knock that up a little bit. Cool, okay. And I'll make that the last thing. Now I'll want to come here to this input and I'll want it to be a little wider. So let's uncheck fixed width and let's bring the minimum height of that input down to like 45, and that's looking okay. Now, if I hit preview again, you'll notice that it spans the entire width of the entire page, which kind of looks weird, frankly. So let's come back here and let's go to this outer group here, this group A, and maybe we'll say group send or something like that. And let's make its max width like 1000, something like that. And then we'll just center everything. And we'll do the same for the repeating group. We'll say its max width can be 1000 pixels wide, and we'll center everything there as well. And maybe we can give this like bottom margin of 20 just so that there's a little bit of breathing room between our send box and our actual message view itself. Let's refresh the page, and yeah, that looks better to me. Now this bottom bar here is just for debugging in Bubble. We don't really need it right now, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight that debug mode and delete and enter. And now we have ourselves just the app itself. Okay, we'll go back into our editor and let's send a message. So if I click on this send message button, what do I want to have happen? Well, for this button click, I want to add a workflow. So I'm going to click on this add workflow button and say, when that button is clicked, I want to create a new thing in the database. What thing? A message. And let's go ahead and add all fields and say this is from me, the user, and the text itself is whatever we typed here, right? This multi-line input. So let's go back and say whatever we typed in this multi-line input A's value is the message itself. Cool. Now let's go here back to our app, refresh, and give it a shot. Hello, and click send. And guess what? We've got ourselves a hello. And obviously it changed the image to myself because it was me, the user, saying it. Now I noticed that after I clicked send, this input didn't clear. It didn't erase the hello. Let's do that real fast and we'll just say reset relevant inputs for step 2. So let's try one more time, refresh, and I'll say, how are you? Question mark. And I'll hit send, and it did indeed give me a message, and it also cleared the input out. Cool. Now, I personally don't really need the divider here. So let's go back to the repeating group in the design tab, click here, and we say, yeah, we don't need this divider. Let's just say none for the separator. And that looks better. Do we need all of this gap spacing between each message? Not that much. So let's come back here and we'll say the minimum height of each row can be like 60 or so. And now let's refresh. And I like that. Okay, again, this isn't the design tutorial, but that suffices for now. Now, how do we get messages back from ChatGPT or from our custom assistant? Well, let's work on that. Let's go to platform.openai.com. If you don't already have an account, you will need an account. It does require a credit card. Don't worry, it's very inexpensive, but it does require one. Once you're here, go over to this left sidebar and click Assistants. And I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new assistant. All you do is click Create. And maybe I'll say this is my weight loss guru or something like that. Weight loss bot or something like that. And as for the instructions, this is you telling ChatGPT how you want it to behave. So maybe we could say something like, you are a helpful weight loss expert. Please refer to the attached PDF document, which I will attach soon, when questions arise or something like that. Again, you can prompt it better than that, but you get the idea. Now, as for the model, this is OpenAI's brand new model. I would highly recommend probably using this, GPT-4 1106 preview. This was November 6th, 2023 when they launched this. As of the filming of this video, they have these two functions available. They're planning on adding more, but I'm going to go ahead and enable both of them. And I'm going to upload a file. Now, what file? I'm just going to look for a weight loss PDF, something like that. I'll click on this, and sure, for this demo, that will work. I'm going to go ahead and download that file, and I'm going to come back into the Assistants API and upload that same file. And voila, as simple as that, I have my bot trained on that specific file. I'm going to hit Save, and you have yourself an assistant. Now, if you want, you can test this assistant. If you click here and click the test on the top right, you can go ahead and test it and run things and make sure it's working the way you want. I'm not going to worry about that in this tutorial, but you can do that if you want. Now, when you click into the assistant, you'll notice this little assistant ID here. That's important. We're going to want to save that for later. So hang on to that. Now, let's go back into our Bubble editor and let's go to the Plugins tab. Click Add Plugins and type Assistants. And you'll see my plugin that I made, OpenAI Assistants API. Go ahead and install that plugin and click Done. Now, the only thing you'll need is your API key. So go back to platform.openai.com and go to API keys here on the left, create a new one. I'm just going to say temporary for video and create. And you've got yourself a key, copy that, come back to your Bubble editor and type in the word bearer space and then paste that key. Same thing here, bearer space and then paste that key. And that's all you need to do. I've done most of the heavy lifting for you. So now you just got to go back to the Design tab and let me explain how this is going to work. So I have this little visual, hopefully it helps. The first thing we want to do is create our assistant. We already did that, right? We did that at platform.openai.com/assistants. It's our custom trained version of ChatGPT. Remember, our weight loss expert. The next thing you'll want to do is create a thread. What is a thread? Well, it's just a list of messages, right? The messages belong to a single conversation. Once we create the thread, we're going to want to create a message that belongs to that thread, right? So it's just whatever the user types, kind of like what we just did earlier, but now we'll be actually creating that message in OpenAI as well. And after we do that, we'll want to create a run. Now, what is a run? It's basically a command telling ChatGPT, hey, I want you to think through this thread and respond. After we create the run, we want to retrieve the run because it takes a little bit of time for ChatGPT to kind of process everything. So we will retrieve that run to check if it's actually ready for us to get its message response back. Once it's ready, we will go ahead and list all the messages that it has on file. OpenAI stored them for us, which is kind of cool. And then we will just literally just grab the most recent one OpenAI's response back, right? Your custom chatbot's response back, and we'll create that in our Bubble database as well. So that's the simple flow. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's go ahead and dive in. So the first thing we want to do is create a thread. So let's go back to our data tab. Let's go to the data types and type in thread. Now, by default, every single data type in Bubble has a unique ID associated with it, just to identify that particular piece of data. But because we're saving it both in Bubble and in OpenAI's servers, we want to add a new field called OpenAI ID. And let's just make that of type text and create. And that's literally all we need for this particular data object. Now let's go to the messages tab. And remember, every message actually belongs to a parent thread, right? So let's make a new field called thread. And that will just be the data type we just made called thread, right? And create. So we can correspond those messages to that thread. All right, let's go back to our design tab and say this page, it needs to be of type thread, because at least for this particular page, there will never be multiple threads on the same page. It'll always be one thread, right? One chat thread happening on this page at any given time. But remember, if we go to the data tab and we go to the app data and we go to the threads data type, there are no threads. We have nothing in our database. Well, let's go to the design tab and we'll say when this page gets loaded, so let's go to the workflow tab actually and say when this page gets loaded, and only when the current page's thread is empty, because guess what? It's going to be as soon as we reload this page, then we'll go ahead and just create a new thread. But guess what? We need its OpenAI ID. So not only do we need to create it here in Bubble, but we also want to create it in OpenAI. So if we go to the plugins and this OpenAI Assistance API I made, if we scroll down, you'll notice that there's this action called create a thread. So let's use that. Let's go back to the workflow and right click and insert an action here and say create thread. And that's all we need to do. It'll create a thread for us in OpenAI as well as in Bubble, but we want to know the ID of that thing. So let's say the ID in OpenAI is just whatever we get back from step one, right? So it's going to create and it's going to send us something back and it'll say, hey, we successfully created a thread. Here's the ID of that thread, right? So we'll just grab the ID. And the last thing we want to do is, since we have created a thread and since this current page's thread is empty, we want to go ahead and just refresh the page. So we'll go to page, the same exact page. Remember, this is the index page. We'll just go here, but this time we want to send the data, right? The thread data. So we'll say whatever the result of step 2 is the data we want to send. All right, so if we go back to our app and we refresh this page, you'll notice that it's going to create a thread and then add the unique ID of that thread it just created onto the page. So now if we go back in here to our data tab, we have ourselves a thread. Now, if we want to go back to the design tab, we don't have to search for just all messages in the database. We'll constrain it down to only those messages who belong to the current page's thread and close that out. Cool. All right, so the next thing we want to do is let's go back to this send message workflow. So when somebody clicks, I'm going to right click and start the workflow for when they click. Remember, we're creating something in Bubble. I guess we also need to assign the thread to that message. So we'll just say the current page's thread. But we also want to create that message in OpenAI. Remember, it's storing all this stuff for us as well. So let's right click and insert an action and say create message. And again, this is part of my plugin, so we'll hit that and we'll say the thread ID. Remember, we already saved that, so we'll just say whatever the current page's thread's OpenAI ID is. The user, it'll pretty much always be user. And then the content, we don't want to always say who are you. We want to say whatever they said here, right, in this input. So this input's name is multi-line input A. I'm going to go back here and say insert dynamic data, whatever they put in multi-line input A's value. Cool, so now we have ourselves a message in OpenAI and a message in Bubble. So let's go back and see where we're at. We've created our assistant, we've made the thread, we've made the message. Now we need to make a run. Now, what is a run? Again, it's just telling OpenAI, hey, run through those messages in that thread and give us a response. So if we go back to our plugin, you'll notice that there's this action called create a run. So we're going to use that. Let's go back here to the workflow tab. Okay, so in our send message workflow, and this button is blue, so sure, I'll make this workflow blue. And we'll go back here. We created a message in OpenAI. We created it also in Bubble. Now let's go ahead and create a run. I'm going to go ahead and do that action. Now, what thread ID should I use? I can just use the current pages threads OpenAI ID. Now, as for the assistant ID, so if we go back to the OpenAI and hit done here, go back to the assistants, we want to process this as if we were the special weight loss bot, right? So let's go ahead and highlight this and copy it and come back here and throw that in the field there as well. Now, just a little pro tip in Bubble. Sometimes I know it looks like these steps happen sequentially, but they actually sometimes happen simultaneously, which is a good thing because you want Bubble to feel fast, lightning fast. But in this case, we want to make sure that step 3 happens after step 1 happens. So what I'm going to do to force that is I'm going to say, instead of just the current page threads OpenAI ID, I'm going to say the result of step 1's thread ID. Because whatever that it did in step 1, it's going to pass back a thread ID. Awesome. Let's see where we're at here. We created the run. Now we want to retrieve the run. Now, this process takes a few seconds. Obviously, the chatbot has to think through everything and then give a response. So in Bubble, the way to wait for a second or 2 or 3 or however many seconds you want to wait for is you got to create a custom event. So click here and go custom, create a custom event. And we will say, ready, ? And this is, again, is just to check whether it's ready. I'm going to go ahead and make this a red color. And now let's go back to our blue workflow. And we'll say, after we do these 4 steps, let's go ahead and type in the word custom for custom event. And we'll say, we'll schedule that custom event into the future. How many seconds into the future? Let's say 1 second. Let's be optimistic and hope it'll be ready in 1 second. It might not be, but let's check, right? So in 1 second into the future, we'll hit this red workflow and we'll say, hey, OpenAI, that run I just did, is it ready? And the way we do that is with the retrieve run step. So go ahead and put retrieve a run. As for the thread ID, yeah, we can just go ahead and say it's the current pages threads OpenAI ID. But as for the run ID, well, we actually need to get that from the blue workflow in step 3. It's going to give us that ID. Well, how do we pass it from this blue workflow over to this red workflow? That's what we call a parameter. So I'm going to add a new parameter and say run ID, something like that. And that will just be simple text. And now we can pass it along here. We can highlight this, insert data, and say whatever the run ID is that we pass through this red gate is what we're going to use for this retrieval step. Now let's go back to the blue workflow and say, oh yeah, we need to specify what the run ID is to pass through that red gate. So we're going to say the result of step 3's ID. Cool. So to reiterate, again, when this blue send message is being clicked, we're creating a message in OpenAI's servers. We're then creating a message here on Bubble's servers. We're then creating a run commanding OpenAI, please think through this and respond. We're then resetting the input, and we're then sending that run ID on over to our red workflow 1 second later, and we're going to retrieve it. We're basically checking, is it ready, yes or no? So let's go back here and we'll say, if it's ready, we want to list all the messages, right? And create the message that it sent back. So let's work on that part first. Let's just pretend it is ready. So we're going to go ahead and list all the messages and pull the most recent one that we got, which will be, again, assuming this is ready, it will be OpenAI's response. So let's go back into our app and say, we're going to go ahead and create a new message in our Bubble database We'll add all fields and say this time it's from the assistant. The text is going to be, we're retrieving all the messages. So if you go back to the plugins, this is our only data call. A data call is when you can write an expression to pull the data, right? We're listing all the messages that we've got that OpenAI has. So let's go back to the workflow tab and say we're going to get data from an external API. Which API? The OpenAI list messages API. Which thread? Let's insert dynamic data and say whatever the current pages threads ID was. And let's close that up. This part's a little bit confusing, but basically all you'll want to do is grab the data it sends back, the first item of the data it sends back, and then the content within that first item, we want to grab its first item and grab the text. That's how you get the text back from OpenAI. Now the thread, again, is just simply the current pages thread. Now, do we always want this to happen? No, because what if it's not ready? What if it doesn't have a message for us? We don't want to create it if it doesn't have it, right? So we'll only do this if the result of step one's status is the word completed. If it comes back as completed, then we know that we're safe to go ahead and pull that message. Cool. But again, what if it's not ready? Well, let's wait another second. So how do we do that? You guessed it. Let's just go ahead and create a new custom event and say ready question mark and then just -2. I guess that'll work. Let's make this red again. Let's add that same parameter that we had before, the run ID, right? We're going to still need that. So we throw that in there and that's of type text. And let's go back to our original workflow and we'll say, yeah, we'll do the same thing. I'm just going to right click, copy, come back here, right click, paste, and we've got ourselves the same action. Now this is broken because it doesn't know what it's pulling from. It's just grabbing the same run ID we had there. Cool. Now let's go back to our first one and right click, copy, come back, right click, paste, and say, yeah, it's going to go ahead and create that reply from ChatGPT, right? Only when the result of step one's status is completed. Now let's actually do the action for if it's not ready. So we'll go ahead and type in the word custom for custom event, and we'll schedule that ready number two for one more second into the future. And the run ID can just be that same run ID we passed through this red gate. We can pass through that red gate. So we'll say the same run ID. Now, do we always want to schedule this thing? No, we only want to schedule it if it's not completed. Right now, the message is being created if it is completed. So let's right click and copy, come here, right click and paste and say, we're only doing it if it's not completed. AKA we still need to wait more seconds, right? Cool. So then we delay a second, it hits this one, number 2, and it tries and it creates it if it exists. But if it does not yet exist, if we've waited 2 seconds, well, let's just go back to number 1, right? So let's say trigger a custom event or schedule a custom event. 1 more second into the future. The run ID can be the exact same one. And let's go back here. Let's right click, copy this, come to step 3, right click, paste this, and say only when it is not completed are we going to keep going, right? So it's going to go through this loop, right? It's going to hit this one, and then it's going to hit the next one, and it's going to hit this one, it's going to hit the next one, back and forth each and every second until it's ready and it actually creates the message, in which case it will stop and it will not trigger the next loop. All right, my friends, let's give this a shot. I'm going to go ahead and close this out, go to the design tab. Did I forget anything? I hope not, but let's give it a shot. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my page. I have myself a new thread. I'm going to say hi and send. It's going to create it in OpenAI as well as here in Bubble. And yay, I've got myself a message. Hello, how can I assist you today? If you have any questions or need advice regarding weight loss, feel free to ask. Cool. Now let's see, what question could I ask it that maybe the general ChatGPT wouldn't know? Let me go ahead and open that PDF again. Let's see here. I'll say, what does step 6 in the document say? Maybe something like that. Turn off the TV and or computer during meals and snacks. Okay. Let's come back here and let's ask, what does step 6 say? Question mark. And send. And yay, it worked. However, it bumped the message down to the next line. We don't want that. So let's go ahead and go back to our bubble editor. And this text here, it's the checkbox fit width to content is checked. Let's uncheck that. Let's also maybe give it some right margin so it's not right aligned with the right side of the repeating group, maybe something like 15 on the right. And let's come back to our app, refresh, and that looks better. Awesome. All right, there you have it. That's how to create your own custom trained assistant with OpenAI's new API. I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, I'd super appreciate a subscription and a smash of the like button. And if you want to learn more in depth about how to build a successful software startup completely without having to code, head over to NoCodeAdvantage.com and I'd love to help you out more. Hope you have a fantastic day.